The rain in Seattle does not wash away sins, it merely makes them glisten under the streetlights, slick and dangerous. I learned this on a Tuesday in November, the kind of evening that seeps into your bones and makes you question the structural integrity of your own life. My daughter-in-law, Serena, had called me at 4 in the afternoon. Her voice was laced with a performative regret that I had chosen to interpret as sincerity. She told me the celebration dinner for my son Lucas's 35th birthday had been canceled. She claimed Lucas had a migraine, a debilitating one, and that they were just going to order takeout and sleep it off. "Stay home, Margaret," she had said. "It is nasty out there. Don't worry about us." I believed her. Why wouldn't I? I was Margaret Vance, 72 years old, a retired art restorer who had spent a lifetime fixing broken things, smoothing over cracks in porcelain and canvas until they looked whole again. I assumed I had done the same with my family, but as I drove past the Obsidian, that ultra-modern, glass-walled restaurant in downtown Seattle that serves steaks costing more than my first car, I glanced sideways. It was a reflex, nothing more. The traffic had stalled, trapping me right in front of the venue. And there, framed by the floor-to-ceiling window, like a perverse living painting, I saw them. Lucas was not in bed nursing a migraine. He was holding a flute of champagne, throwing his head back in laughter. Beside him sat Serena, wearing an emerald green dress I had never seen, looking radiant and predatory. They were not alone. Surrounded by a dozen of their friends, they were feasting. I saw platters of oysters, towers of seafood, and bottles of wine that I knew, with a sickening lurch of my stomach, were being charged to the black Amex card I had lent Serena for emergencies. The world did not stop. The windshield wipers kept slapping back and forth, counting down the seconds of my naivety. Click, clack, click, clack. In that moment, something inside me, perhaps the last thread of the blind devotion I had held for my only child since his father died, finally snapped. It was a clean break. There was no pain, not yet. Just a cold, clinical clarity. I pulled my phone from my purse, my hands steady for the first time in years. I opened the banking app. I saw the pending charge. The Obsidian. $4,200. I did not scream. I navigated to the card services menu. I hit the button marked Report Lost or Stolen. Then I selected Immediate Cancellation. I looked up at the window. It took about 3 minutes. A waiter approached their table with a sleek black folder. He leaned down and whispered something to Lucas. I watched my son's face transform from euphoric to confused, and then to a pale shade of gray. He tapped his pockets. He looked at Serena. She pulled out her phone, tapping furiously. Then, she looked up. Her eyes scanned the street, searching for a signal, for an answer, and they locked onto my silver sedan idling in the traffic. She saw me. I know she saw me. I saw her lips move, a curse word sharp enough to cut glass. I did not look away. I stared at her until the traffic light turned green, and then I pressed the accelerator and drove into the dark, rainy night, leaving them to explain to 12 guests why the Bank of Mom had just closed its doors forever. My name is Margaret. For 40 years, I was married to Henry, a man who smelled of sawdust and safety. When he passed away 6 years ago, he left me with a comfortable nest egg, a paid-off craftsman house in Queen Anne, and a hole in my heart the size of the universe. I tried to fill that void with Lucas. He was a graphic designer, talented but drifting, always one break away from success, or so he said. When he met Serena 3 years ago, I thought she was the anchor he needed. She was ambitious, a marketing consultant with high cheekbones and expensive taste. I was wrong. She wasn't an anchor, she was a weight, and I had been the water keeping them afloat. Returning to my empty house that night, the silence was deafening. I sat in the wingback chair Henry used to love, listening to the rain hammer against the roof. The adrenaline from the restaurant was fading, replaced by a nausea that had nothing to do with food. I realized that the cancellation of the dinner wasn't just a lie, it was a dismissal. I was not polished enough, not young enough, not cool enough for their friends. I was the wallet. Necessary but embarrassing. I needed to know the extent of the damage. I walked into my study and booted up my computer. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I had given Lucas access to my main checking account 2 years ago, after he convinced me it would be easier for him to help me manage bills if I ever got sick. I had trusted him implicitly. I logged in, the screen populated with numbers, and my breath hitched in my throat. It wasn't just the dinner. The scroll bar on the right side of the screen was tiny, indicating pages and pages of transactions. I started with the current month: luxury spas, high-end boutiques, a weekend getaway to Napa Valley that they had told me was a business conference. I went back 6 months. Then a year. I pulled a yellow legal pad from the drawer and started writing. January: $5,000 at a ski resort in Whistler. February: $12,000 for furniture from a designer showroom. March: $8,000 at a cosmetic surgery clinic. The numbers blurred. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I felt like an archaeologist excavating the ruins of my own financial security. By the time the sun began to bleed gray light through the curtains, I had a total. In the last 18 months, my son and his wife had siphoned $340,000 from my retirement savings. $340,000. It was money Henry and I had saved, dollar by dollar. It was the vacation we never took. It was the security for my old age, so I wouldn't have to burden anyone. They hadn't just spent my money. They had spent my future. They had spent my dignity. I went to the kitchen and made a pot of coffee. I didn't drink it. I just held the warm mug, staring at the steam. I felt foolish. I felt ancient. But mostly, I felt a simmering rage that was entirely new to me. Margaret the peacemaker was dead. In her place sat a woman who had survived widowhood and was not about to be destroyed by the child she had raised. At 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. It was an aggressive, rhythmic pounding. I knew who it was. I opened the door to find Lucas standing on the porch, soaked and shivering, his eyes wild. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't apologize. "Mom, what is wrong with you?" he shouted, pushing past me into the foyer. "Do you have any idea how humiliating that was last night?" I closed the door calmly and turned to face him. He looked like a stranger. The softness I remembered in his face was gone, replaced by a petulant hardness. "Humiliating?" I repeated, testing the word. "You found it humiliating to be unable to pay for a party you threw with stolen money?" "Stolen?" Lucas scoffed, pacing the living room rug, leaving muddy footprints. "That is a strong word, Mom. We were celebrating. It was my birthday, and you embarrassed us in front of Serena's clients. We had to call Richard to bail us out. Do you know how that looks?" I walked over to the coffee table where I had stacked the printouts of the bank statements. I picked up the stack. It was heavy, thick as a phone book. I dropped it on the table. It made a loud, dull thud. "Explain this, Lucas." He looked down, and for a second, his bravado faltered. He recognized the bank logo. "That is, those are just expenses, Mom. Living in this city is expensive. You know that. We were going to pay you back. It was a loan." "A loan implies permission," I said, my voice steady. "A loan implies a repayment plan. A loan implies you ask. This is theft. $340,000, Lucas. You spent my entire liquid savings." He ran a hand through his wet hair. "Serena needs certain things for her image, Mom. She is an influencer. It is an investment. And the trips? We needed to decompress. You have this house. You have Dad's pension. You don't even spend money. Why are you being so greedy?" Greedy. The word hung in the air between us, toxic and absurd. I looked at this man, 35 years old, wearing a watch that likely cost more than my medical deductible, calling me greedy for wanting to keep the money I needed to survive. "Get out," I said softly. "What?" "Get out of my house, Lucas, and tell your wife that the bank is closed." He laughed, a cruel, incredulous sound. "You can't be serious. You are overreacting. Look, just reactivate the card, transfer some funds to cover the overdraft, and we will forget you had this little episode. We can even come over for dinner on Sunday. Serena is willing to forgive you." "Serena is willing to forgive me?" I felt a laugh bubble up in my own throat, hysterical and sharp. I walked to the door and opened it wide. The rain was still falling. "If you are not off my property in 1 minute, Lucas, I am calling the police and reporting a grand larceny." He stared at me, searching for the bluff. He didn't find one. For the first time, genuine fear flickered in his eyes. He backed away, shaking his head. "You are going to regret this, Mom. You are going to be a lonely old woman, and you will have no one to blame but yourself." He stormed out to his car. I locked the door, slid the deadbolt home, and slid down to the floor, weeping until my chest ached. He was right about one thing. I was alone, but I would rather be alone with my dignity than surrounded by parasites. I spent the next 2 days in a fugue state, mourning the living. On the third day, my neighbor, Beatrice, knocked on the back door. B was 75, a retired forensic accountant with hair dyed a shocking shade of purple and a mind like a steel trap. She took one look at me, my unwashed hair, the dark circles under my eyes, and pushed her way in with a casserole dish. "Eat," she commanded. "Then, talk." I told her everything. I showed her the statements. B didn't gasp. She didn't offer platitudes. She put on her reading glasses and went to work. "Margaret, this isn't just spending," she said after an hour, tapping a page with a manicured fingernail. "Look at the transfers. They are moving money into an offshore account. Small amounts, so it doesn't trigger alerts. And look here. This consulting firm they are paying $5,000 a month to? It is a shell company. The address is a P.O. box in Nevada." I felt cold. "They are laundering my money?" "They are building a lifeboat," Bea corrected. "They are stripping your assets to build their own stash. And listen to me, honey. If they have the power of attorney or any access to the deed of this house, you are in danger. Not physical danger, maybe, but they will put you in a state-run home the second you become an inconvenience, so they can sell this place." I remembered the papers Lucas had tried to get me to sign last Christmas. "Just updating the estate planning, Mom," he had said. I hadn't signed them because I couldn't find my reading glasses. Fate, it seemed, had intervened. "What do I do, B?" B smiled, and it was a terrifying expression. "You fight. My nephew David is the nastiest divorce and estate lawyer in Seattle. We are going to see him tomorrow, and you are going to need access to their communications. Did Lucas ever log into his cloud account on your computer?" "He did," I whispered. "He used my iPad when his broke. Go get it." What we found on that iPad shattered whatever fragments of love I had left for Serena. It was a group chat titled The Golden Goose. It was between Serena and her 2 sisters. Serena. The old bat canceled the card, literally at dinner. I could have killed her. Sister 1. "Oh my God, what are you going to do?" Serena. "Lucas is going over to gaslight her. If that doesn't work, we play the victim card. She is desperate for attention. She will fold. She always does. Sister 2. Just make sure you get the house deed before she kicks the bucket." Serena. "Working on it. She is practically senile anyway. It won't be hard." Senile? The old bat? The golden goose? I took screenshots of everything. Every insult, every admission of theft, every plan to defraud me. I printed them out. The next morning, I met with David. He was a sharp-suited man who listened intently. When he saw the evidence, he let out a low whistle. "Mrs. Vance, we have them on fraud, elder abuse, and theft. We can file criminal charges." I looked at the rainy skyline of Seattle through his office window. I thought about Lucas running in the park as a toddler. I thought about the man who stood in my hallway and called me greedy. "I don't want them in prison, David. Not yet. I want them to understand what it feels like to have the ground ripped out from under them. I want justice, but I want it on my terms." We devised a plan. It was a trap, cruel and necessary. I called Lucas a week later. I kept my voice weak, tremulous. I told him I had been thinking, that I was confused and lonely, and that I wanted to make things right. I invited them over for a peace-offering dinner. They arrived with triumphant smiles plastered on their faces. Serena brought a cheap bouquet of supermarket flowers. Lucas hugged me, but his body was stiff. "I am so glad you came to your senses, Mom," Serena purred, looking around the living room as if measuring it for new curtains. "We were so worried about your mental state." I led them to the dining room. I had set the table beautifully, the good china, the crystal. But there was no food. In the center of the table sat 3 piles of documents. "Sit down," I said. They sat. exchanging confused glances. "Where is dinner?" Lucas asked. "This is dinner," I said. I picked up the first pile. The bank statements. $340,000. This is the appetizer. I picked up the second pile. The screenshots of the group chat. The old bat. The golden goose. This is the main course. Serena's face went white. She reached for the papers, but I slapped her hand away. "Do not touch them. Copies have already been sent to my lawyer and the forensic unit of the Seattle Police Department." Lucas stood up, knocking his chair over. "Mom, you can't. This is illegal. You invaded our privacy. You spent my life savings on handbags and fraudulent consulting fees." "Lucas!" I roared, slamming my hand on the table. My voice, usually so soft, filled the room. "You stole from the woman who wiped your nose and paid for your college and held you when your father died. You are a thief." Serena stood up, her eyes narrowing. "Let's go, Lucas. She is crazy. We will fight this in court. No judge will side with a vindictive old woman over a young couple trying to survive." "Sit down." The command didn't come from me. It came from the kitchen doorway. B stepped out, followed by David and 2 uniformed police officers. Lucas dropped back into his chair, as if his strings had been cut. Serena froze. "This is an intervention," David said calmly, stepping forward. "Mrs. Vance has prepared a settlement agreement. It is the third pile on the table." Lucas looked at the document with trembling hands. "What is this?" "It is a confession and a repayment plan," David explained. "You acknowledge the debt of $340,000. You agree to repay it with interest. You agree to vacate the condo Mrs. Vance purchased for you, yes. We know she holds the deed, even though you told your friends it was yours. And you agree to zero contact unless initiated by her." "And if we don't sign?" Serena hissed. "Then the officers here will escort you downtown for booking on charges of grand larceny, elder financial abuse, and wire fraud," David said pleasantly. "The prison sentence for this amount is roughly 5 to 10 years. The silence in the room was absolute. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Lucas looked at Serena. He looked for the partner, the anchor, the woman he had stolen for. He found nothing. Serena was looking at the officers, calculating her odds. "I didn't know," she said suddenly, her voice high and fearful. "I didn't know it was her money. Lucas told me he had a trust fund. He told me it was his." "I am a victim here too." Lucas turned to her, his jaw dropping. "What? You were the one who told me to transfer the funds. You were the one who set up the shell company." "He lied to me!" Serena screamed at the police. "Arrest him! I had nothing to do with it." In that moment, I saw Lucas break. He watched the love of his life throw him to the wolves without a second thought. He looked at me, his eyes filling with tears. Not the fake tears of manipulation, but the real, hot tears of a man realizing he has destroyed his life for a mirage. "I will sign," Lucas whispered. "Lucas, no!" Serena shrieked. "I will sign," he repeated, louder. He took the pen David offered. He signed the document. Then he looked at Serena. "Get out." "Excuse me?" "We are done, Serena. Get out." She looked at him, then at the police, then at me. She sneered, a mask of pure ugliness. "Fine. You are a loser anyway, Lucas. A mommy's boy with no spine. And you," she spat at me, "I hope you die alone in this big, empty house." She grabbed her purse and stomped out. The police officers followed her to ensure she left the premises. Lucas sat there, slumped over the table, weeping into the documents that detailed his betrayal. I wanted to go to him. The mother in me wanted to wrap her arms around him and tell him it would be okay, but I stayed in my chair. Because it wouldn't be okay. Not for a long time. And I couldn't fix this for him. I had fixed things for him his whole life, and that is how we had ended up here. "You have 30 days to move out of the condo," I said, my voice tired but firm. "The payment plan starts next month. I suggest you get a second job." "Mom," Lucas sobbed. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry." "I know," I said. "And I forgive you. But I do not trust you. And until you can earn that back, you are a stranger to me." Lucas left an hour later. B stayed. We drank wine in the kitchen and didn't say much. There wasn't much to say. The next year was a blur of activity. I sold the condo. I sold the jewelry Serena had left behind. She hadn't been able to take it in her haste. I took all the recovered money, along with the payments Lucas started making faithfully, and I did something I had dreamed of for 20 years. I opened a storefront in Pioneer Square. The Gilded Edge. It was an art restoration studio combined with a small gallery for local, forgotten artists. I hired young students to help me. I filled my days with the smell of varnish and turpentine, bringing beauty back to faded canvases. Lucas hit rock bottom. He moved into a studio apartment the size of a shoebox. He worked days at his graphic design job and nights delivering food to make the payments to me. He went to therapy, court-mandated at first, then voluntarily. We didn't speak for 6 months. Then, slowly, we started with emails, then coffee. Short, awkward meetings where he didn't ask for money and I didn't offer advice. One rainy afternoon in November, exactly 2 years after the dinner that never happened, Lucas walked into my studio. He looked older. He had gray in his temples. He was wearing a simple coat, not the designer gear he used to favor. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Hi, Lucas." He walked over to the counter and placed a check on it. It was the final payment for the year. He was actually ahead of schedule. "Thank you," I said. He lingered, looking at a painting I was restoring. It was a 19th century seascape, torn down the middle, dark with grime. "Do you think you can save it?" he asked. I ran my hand over the canvas. "It is damaged," I said. "The tear is deep. It will never look like it did when it was new. The scar will always be there if you look close enough." Lucas nodded, understanding the subtext. "But," I continued, dipping my brush into the solvent, "if we reinforce the back, clean away the dirt, and treat it with care, it can have a second life. Different, but strong, maybe even beautiful in a new way." He looked at me, his eyes clear. "I am trying, Mom. I am really trying." "I know," I said, and for the first time in years, I reached out and covered his hand with mine. I didn't invite him to dinner that night. I had plans with Bia and my new business partner, but I watched him walk out into the Seattle rain, his head held high, walking toward the bus stop. He didn't have a luxury car anymore. He didn't have a trophy wife. He didn't have my credit card. But as I watched him go, I realized he had something better. He had his own life, weighty and real, and I had mine. I turned back to the painting, the smell of rain and oil paint filling the air. There are moments in life that tear you in two, yes, but it is in the mending, in the refusal to stay broken, that we find out who we really are. And standing there, amidst the solvents and the silence, I finally knew. I wasn't just a mother, or a widow, or a victim. I was Margaret, and for the first time in a long time, that was enough.